Impaired alien princess, rejected by all but one human, asked. Will you mate with me? The princess was born under the grand dome of her empire's capital, a city that shimmered with towers of glass and light. From the moment she opened her eyes, it was clear that she was different. Her body moved with difficulty, and her limbs were not as strong as the other children. Courtiers whispered quietly, their voices full of pity, though no one dared say it aloud. Her parents, the emperor and empress, tried to hide their worry behind smiles, but even they could not mask their disappointment. The empire had always valued strength, beauty, and perfection above all else, and the princess's impairment marked her as a failure in their eyes. Despite the stares and the hushed words, the princess grew with a quiet intelligence. She learned quickly, absorbing knowledge of science, politics, and history faster than any child had before her. Books became her companions, their pages alive with worlds she could explore even if her own body limited her. Her tutors spoke of her brilliance in private, but in the halls of the palace, no one celebrated her achievements. She learned to sit quietly while her siblings and other nobles, children played and laughed, always aware of the way the empire judged her. As she grew older, the rejection became more direct. Suitors who had once shown polite interest in meeting her began to disappear, citing excuses that were never convincing. Marriages in the empire were never about love, they were about alliances, and no one wanted to ally themselves with a princess considered flawed. Invitations for political negotiations were quietly removed from her schedule. Balls and ceremonies went on without her, and even servants who had once treated her kindly now treated her with the faint coldness of fear. Yet, despite this isolation, she never became bitter. She understood that the empire had its rules, even if they were cruel. The princess often wandered alone in the palace gardens, where trees with silver leaves whispered in the wind. Here she could dream without judgment, imagining a world where she was valued for her mind and heart rather than her appearance. She noticed things others did not, the way the wind bent the trees, how insects communicated through vibrations, the patterns in the stars above. These small details became her teachers. She understood that the world had more than one way to measure worth, even if her empire did not. One day, a new delegation arrived at the capital. Humans, a species long rumored to be weak and short-lived, had come to negotiate trade and alliances. The Imperial Council scoffed at them openly. Humans were frail, slow, and short-lived. They would never understand the ways of a powerful empire. And yet the princess noticed something different about them immediately. The humans did not look at her with pity. They did not turn away in discomfort or whisper behind their hands. One human in particular, a quiet man with dark hair and steady eyes, seemed to notice her in a way that made her heart beat faster, though she did not understand why. He did not see her as broken. He saw her as a person. At the next formal event, she was seated in her usual isolated position, away from the nobles who whispered and laughed. The human approached her, bowing slightly, but not with the exaggerated politeness the other delegates used. "Princess," he said simply. "May I speak with you?" His voice was calm and steady. It carried no mockery, no pity, only respect. The princess hesitated. No one had ever asked her to speak alone with a delegate, and certainly not with a human, a species considered inferior by her people. Still, something in his eyes encouraged her. She nodded, and he led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The view was magnificent, towers of light stretching to the horizon, streets buzzing with life, the sky above painted in gold and violet. "I have heard of your intellect," he said, "and I wanted to meet you, not as a princess, not as a symbol, but as a person." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The princess felt something stir inside her. No one in her life had ever spoken to her like that. Everyone else had focused on what she could not do, but this human had looked past that entirely. They spoke for hours. She shared her ideas about trade, governance, and the sciences. He asked questions that no one had ever asked her, questions that made her think and explore answers in ways she had not considered. The court could see them from afar, whispering, but no one interfered. Even the emperor watched with a frown, uncertain whether to interrupt or allow the human's boldness. By the end of their conversation, the princess felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps the world did not have to see her as broken. Perhaps someone could see her value. When the human stood to leave, he paused. "I hope to speak with you again, princess," he said. "I want to understand more about your thoughts and perhaps share mine." The court watched in disbelief. A human had not only approached the princess, but he had done so boldly, openly. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Was this a trick? Was he trying to humiliate her? The princess felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. She did not know what the human's intentions were, but for the first time in her life, she felt seen. In the following weeks, the human returned. He asked for private meetings, each time showing more respect and admiration for her mind and character. He listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. The princess began to look forward to these meetings. They were a respite from the cold eyes of her own people, a place where she could simply be herself. The alien court, however, did not approve. Whispers turned into complaints. Officials warned the human that associating with the princess could damage his position and reputation. Other delegates tried to undermine their conversations, offering bribes or threats, but the human did not waver. He treated her with the same calm dignity he had shown from the beginning. One evening, after a long day of negotiations that had gone poorly, the princess and the human stood together on the balcony again. The city lights twinkled below them like stars brought to earth. She felt a courage she had never known before. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. "Why do you not see me as broken?" He looked at her steadily. "Because strength is not only in the body," he said. "It is in the mind, in the heart, in the courage to keep moving forward when everyone else turns away. You have all of that, princess. I see it." For the first time, the princess felt a tear slip down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of relief. Someone had finally recognized her worth. She had spent so long alone, rejected by everyone else, that she had almost begun to believe their words. But this human reminded her that worth was not given by society. It was shown by those who truly cared and understood. As the days passed, the bond between the princess and the human grew stronger. They discussed ideas that could change the empire, shared dreams of a future where no one would be cast aside for being different. And in the quiet moments, when the city slept and the stars shone above, the princess realized that for the first time she felt hope. The court continued to whisper, and not all were pleased with the growing connection. Some feared what it might mean for the empire's image. Others feared that the human might use the princess to gain influence. Still, the princess and the human did not care. They had found something more valuable than fear or power. They had found understanding, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of trust. The part ended as the princess stood at the balcony once more, watching the horizon glow with the setting sun. She thought of the humans and their courage to act differently, to see people for who they were instead of what they were. She thought of the future, uncertain and unknown, yet filled with possibility. And she wondered, with a quiet pulse of curiosity and hope, what might happen next if the human continued to stay by her side. For the first time in her life, the princess did not feel alone. The palace was quiet that morning, with sunlight spilling across the marble floors and painting long shadows through the tall windows. The alien princess sat at her usual place in the library, surrounded by books, scrolls, and instruments. Her fingers traced the worn edges of a text about the stars. She had spent years learning, growing smarter, and observing the patterns of life and power in her empire. Yet despite all her knowledge, she could not predict what would happen next. The human arrived at her door without warning, bowing slightly but with a friendly smile. "Princess," he said, "may I join you?" His voice was calm and confident, yet gentle, as if he had known her for many lifetimes. The princess looked up and saw no ridicule in his eyes, only the same quiet respect he had shown from the start. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips, and he stepped inside. He carried no gifts, no fancy words of flattery, only his presence. It was unusual for her. Everyone in the empire approached her with careful calculations, politeness layered with hidden agendas. But this human spoke plainly. "I want to ask you something," he said, taking a seat near her. "Something serious. But first, I need you to know that I respect you, your mind, and your choices. I have no intention of humiliating you or forcing you into anything." The princess blinked. She had grown used to caution, to reading people for hidden intentions. Yet in the human's words, she sensed honesty. "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had learned to keep her hopes guarded, but somehow she could not stop her curiosity from reaching out. He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. "In my culture," he began, "we do not value perfection as your people do. Strength comes in many forms: courage, intelligence, kindness. I have seen all of these in you, and I want to know if you would be willing to form a bond with me." The words hung in the air like a delicate crystal. The princess's mind raced. A bond in the human sense was more than just friendship. It was a choice, a lifelong connection. She had been rejected her entire life because of her body, her differences, her perceived flaws. And now here was a human, a stranger to her culture, asking her for a bond not out of duty or politics, but out of choice and admiration. She began, struggling to find words. I do not understand. Why me? Why a human? Her voice shook slightly, but she did not hide her fear. Humans were not considered strong or important in her empire. They were fragile, often laughed at in whispered jokes among nobles. To choose one voluntarily was unthinkable. The human smiled gently. Because I see you, he said simply. Not as a princess, not as someone the empire has decided is flawed, but as a person. And I want to stand with you, to support you, to make sure no one's judgment can ever define your worth again. The princess felt her chest tighten. She had spent years living in isolation, learning to accept that the world would never see her as valuable. And yet here was someone, a human no less, telling her that she mattered, that she had a place in the world not because of her title, but because of who she was. The conversation continued, hours stretching into the afternoon. They spoke of what a bond would mean. In the empire, such an alliance could be seen as scandalous, foolish, or even dangerous. Yet the human did not hesitate. He explained that in his culture, choice mattered more than strength, that loyalty and understanding were the greatest forms of power. He would accept no compromise that threatened the princess's freedom or dignity. The princess found herself growing bolder. She asked questions she had never dared to ask before. Could a human truly hold the respect of an entire empire? Could someone so different really change the world? The human answered with stories of human civilizations that had risen despite being small, weak, and underestimated. He spoke of ingenuity, perseverance, and courage, the qualities humans had relied on for survival and success. By evening, the princess felt something unfamiliar: hope. It was fragile, yet undeniable. She had spent her life being rejected and ignored, yet this human's words carried a weight no one else had ever given her. For the first time, she imagined a future where she could stand beside someone who did not see her as broken, but as capable, intelligent, and worthy. But the empire was not idle. Whispers had spread like wildfire. Courtiers and nobles murmured about the human's audacity, calling him foolish, naive, and dangerous. Some warned the princess that accepting him could bring disgrace or even danger. Others plotted to turn the human's boldness into a trap. The princess listened to none of it. She had learned that fear and gossip had no claim over her mind. The next day, the human asked her a question no one in the empire would dare to ask aloud. Standing in the palace courtyard, the air warm with sunlight and the soft fragrance of flowers, he said clearly, "Princess, will you mate with me?" The words were shocking, not only because of their meaning in the empire, but because they carried no coercion. There was no pressure, no demand. He asked as an equal, offering a choice, respecting her freedom. In her culture, the term was tied to duty and status, often decided by family and politics. But here, the human offered it as a personal choice, a partnership based on respect and understanding. The princess froze. The world seemed to tilt around her. She felt a mixture of fear, disbelief, and curiosity. She had never imagined such an offer. All her life, she had been cast aside, told she was unworthy, that no one would ever want her. And now, a human, someone from a distant and underestimated species, had asked her to stand with him voluntarily. She wanted to laugh, but it caught in her throat. "Why?" she whispered, almost to herself. "Why me?" The human stepped closer, but did not touch her. "Because I see the strength you carry in ways others cannot. Because I know the world does not define your value, but we can choose to define it ourselves together. You have faced rejection your entire life. I want to make sure you are never alone again." The princess felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of courage she had never experienced. She had always been taught to bend, to hide, to accept the world's judgment. But now someone had offered her the chance to rise above it, to define her own worth. Yet the empire was watching. Noble advisors whispered among themselves, and guards shifted uneasily. Some laughed openly, mocking the human's audacity. Others scowled, warning of scandal and dishonor. The princess felt a surge of defiance. She realized that no one had the right to dictate her life or choices. Her body, her mind, her intelligence, all of it belonged to her and no one else. She began, her voice trembling but strong. "I will consider it." The human nodded, a quiet smile on his face. That is all I ask, no rush, no pressure, just truth, your choice always. In the days that followed, the two met repeatedly. They spoke of philosophy, governance, and ways the empire could change to become fairer to all its citizens. The princess began to imagine a future where she could lead not through fear or appearance, but through knowledge and courage. The human taught her that true power came from the ability to make choices, to stand up for what is right, and to respect the value of others no matter what society said. At first, whispers in the court were cruel. Many expected the princess to decline, to cling to tradition and obedience. They could not understand why she would even speak to a human in such ways. But she began to feel a quiet strength growing inside her, a belief that she could challenge the empire's narrow ideas of worth and power. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the city in gold and violet, the human and the princess stood together on the balcony once again. The wind carried a hint of jasmine, and the city below glimmered like a field of tiny stars. She looked at him, and for the first time she felt a mixture of pride and hope. "Do you truly mean what you say?" she asked softly. "That you see me as I am?" He nodded. "Always, not because the empire approves, not because it benefits me, but because I choose to see you." Always, the princess felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had never been seen like this before. She had never been valued for her thoughts, her courage, or her heart. And now she realized that perhaps the world was wider than she had ever imagined, that humans, though underestimated, understood something vital about strength and dignity. That night, the princess returned to her chambers with a mind full of possibilities. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of freedom. She was no longer merely a princess defined by her impairment or by the cruel judgments of others. She had a choice, she had a voice, and she had someone who respected her for who she truly was. The human's offer, bold and unconventional, had changed everything. It had reminded her that the measure of a person was not in appearance, nor in societal approval, but in courage, loyalty, and the ability to act with integrity. And as she drifted to sleep, she knew that her life was about to change forever. For the first time, the princess allowed herself to imagine standing beside the human, not as someone pitied or rejected, but as an equal, respected, and valued. The empire had always taught her that her worth was limited, but now she felt a quiet certainty growing inside her. She had found someone who could see her, truly see her, and for that reason alone, she was beginning to believe that the impossible might be possible. And so, as the night settled over the city and the stars twinkled above, the princess made a silent promise to herself. She would consider the human's offer, not because it was expected or convenient, but because she finally had the power to choose her own path. For the first time, she felt that she might truly belong, not to an empire, not to the expectations of others, but to a future she could shape with her own hands, and with someone who saw her for all that she truly was. The morning sun rose over the imperial city, casting long, golden rays across the marble towers. The alien princess stood on the balcony of her private chambers, watching the courtiers arrive for their daily routines. Her thoughts were not on the usual gossip of the palace, but on the human who had changed everything in the last few weeks. His words and actions echoed in her mind. He had offered her a choice, a partnership based on respect, not duty, and she had never felt such clarity and courage before. The court, however, had not forgotten. News of the human's bold proposal had spread through the palace like wildfire. Courtiers whispered in hallways, and nobles shook their heads in disbelief. Some laughed openly at the idea that a human, considered weak and fragile, could even ask to bond with a princess. Others feared what this alliance could mean for the empire's image. The emperor himself looked troubled, pacing in his private office, considering whether to intervene. The princess knew that standing with the human would invite scrutiny, perhaps even danger. But for the first time, fear did not dictate her actions. She had spent her life being judged for what she could not change, and she had endured rejection without complaint. Now she felt a quiet strength growing inside her, a sense that she could face the empire and define her own path. When the human arrived that day, he walked confidently through the palace doors. He had learned the customs of the empire quickly, yet he did not bend under the weight of its traditions. Courtiers turned away, muttering under their breath, but he ignored them, focusing only on the princess. He greeted her with a calm smile, and she returned it, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and determination. "I hear the court is less than pleased with me," he said quietly as they walked through the gardens. The princess laughed softly. "Pleased is not the word," she replied. "They are angry, confused, and perhaps a little afraid." He nodded. "Good, that means we are doing something important. The Empire has rules that are outdated. Strength is not only measured by muscle or appearance. Sometimes it is measured by courage, loyalty, and integrity. That is what humans value. That is what I see in you." The princess felt warmth in her chest. His words reminded her of why she had begun to trust him. Unlike her own people, he did not see her as broken. He saw her as capable, intelligent, and deserving of choice. "It is difficult," she admitted. "Everyone expects me to bend, to accept what they decide for me, but with you it feels different. I feel free." "That is because you are free," he said. "No one can take that from you unless you allow it, and I will stand with you no matter what the court says." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of senior nobles, their robes shimmering with authority. They bowed formally to the princess, but their eyes were filled with judgment. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, spoke first. "Princess," he said, his voice edged with disapproval, "we have heard troubling reports about your relationship with the human delegate. This is highly inappropriate and threatens the dignity of the throne." The princess met his gaze steadily. "I do not see this as a threat," she replied calmly. "I see it as an opportunity to demonstrate values that go beyond appearances. Strength is not only in power or perfection, it is in courage, wisdom, and loyalty." The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Their world was built on rules and expectations. A human defying those rules, standing with a princess rejected by the Empire, was more than they could comprehend. They attempted to intimidate her, reminding her of the potential consequences: loss of status, political isolation, and public scorn. Yet the princess did not waver. The human stepped forward beside her, his presence steady and unwavering. "She speaks the truth," he said firmly. "I am not here to humiliate or manipulate. I am here to offer respect, partnership, and understanding. If you cannot see that, it is not her fault but your own limitations." The court erupted in murmurs. Some were shocked at his audacity, while others were outraged at the challenge to tradition. The emperor, who had been observing silently, frowned deeply. He had always valued control and order above all else. Yet, even he could not deny the calm confidence of the human and the dignified composure of his daughter. A trial was called to determine the legitimacy of the bond. In the imperial empire, such an alliance was unprecedented, and the court needed to decide whether it would be allowed. The princess and the human were summoned before the council of elders, who sat high above them in a semicircle of authority. Their faces were stern, their eyes sharp with judgment. The first elder, a man with long silver hair, spoke. "Princess, the Empire does not condone unions outside the established norms. Your choice endangers the reputation of the throne and undermines the traditions that have governed our people for centuries." The princess took a deep breath. "Traditions do not define value," she said. "They only reflect fear of what is different. I have lived my life under the weight of judgment. I know what it means to be rejected, but I also know that strength comes in many forms. Courage, intelligence, and loyalty are stronger than perfection. The human before you respects me for who I am, not what society says I should be." The court was silent for a moment. Such words were unheard of from a princess in their empire. The human then spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Your traditions may hold power over appearances, but they do not hold power over choice, integrity, or morality. I stand beside her not out of weakness, but because I value truth and honor. If that threatens your expectations, it is a reflection of your own fear, not our actions." Some elders scowled, while others whispered to each other, uncertain how to respond. The princess felt a surge of pride. She realized that her voice, combined with the human's courage, was shaking the very foundations of the empire. For the first time, she felt that she was not alone in facing judgment. The trial continued for several days. Witnesses were called, arguments were presented, and the court debated fiercely. Some argued that allowing a human-princess alliance would weaken the empire, while others saw the potential for reform and progress. Through it all, the princess and the human remained steadfast, answering questions with clarity, honesty, and dignity. At one point, a crisis arose in the city. A malfunction in the energy grid threatened to leave the palace and surrounding districts in darkness. Many in the court panicked, unsure how to handle the situation. The human stepped forward, using knowledge he had gained during his time studying human and alien engineering. With the princess assisting him, they coordinated repairs that restored power swiftly and efficiently. The court was astonished. The princess's intellect, combined with the human's ingenuity, had solved a problem that others could not. Whispers of admiration replaced some of the earlier criticism. Even skeptics could not deny the competence and effectiveness of their partnership. After the crisis, the princess and the human were summoned once more before the council. The elder with silver hair spoke again, his tone softer than before. "It seems that your actions have demonstrated abilities and judgment beyond what we expected. Perhaps there is merit in considering alternative measures of strength and leadership." The princess felt a quiet smile spread across her face. She had not only defended herself, but had shown the Empire that value could not be measured by appearance alone. The human stood beside her, his presence a reminder that courage, loyalty, and respect could challenge even centuries of tradition. In private, after the council adjourned, the human turned to her. "You were remarkable today," he said. "You did not falter even when the Empire tried to crush your spirit. That is the truest strength I have ever seen." The princess looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "I could not have done it alone," she said. "Your support, it made me realize that I am not defined by their expectations. I can define myself." Days turned into weeks, and the court slowly began to accept the unusual bond. While some continued to resist, many could not ignore the effectiveness and dignity of the princess and the human. Their alliance became a symbol of what could happen when courage, respect, and intelligence were valued above appearances. The princess began to take on more responsibilities in the empire, working alongside the human to implement reforms and improve governance. They visited distant provinces, observing conditions and listening to the concerns of citizens who had long been ignored. The human's perspective, combined with the princess's knowledge and empathy, brought new solutions to old problems. Together, they faced challenges that would have defeated others. They dealt with nobles who tried to sabotage their efforts, with merchants who doubted their competence, and with citizens who were skeptical of change. Yet, through each obstacle, the princess grew stronger, more confident, and more certain of her own value. The human remained a steady presence, offering wisdom, courage, and unwavering respect. By the end of the third part of the story, the empire was beginning to change. The princess was no longer seen merely as a rejected figure, but as a symbol of resilience and intellect. The human had proven that strength was not limited to his species, and that courage and moral integrity could challenge centuries of tradition. Together, they had shown that true power came from respect, loyalty, and the ability to make choices based on conscience rather than fear. The city settled into quiet as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The princess stood on her balcony, looking out over the empire she had once feared would never accept her. Beside her, the human remained silent, a calm presence in the fading light. For the first time, she felt a sense of possibility. The empire, once rigid and unforgiving, had begun to bend, if only slightly. And she knew that as long as she had courage, intelligence, and allies who respected her, she could face anything. The human had not only offered her a bond, but had shown her the true meaning of strength and partnership. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. The empire still had challenges ahead, but she no longer feared them. She had found someone who saw her worth, and together they would shape a future that was fair, strong, and just. And as the stars began to appear above the city, she knew that the hardest battles had been won, not against the court, nor against tradition, but against the fear that had kept her from believing in herself. With the human at her side, she was ready to face whatever the empire, or the galaxy, might throw at her next. The city awoke to a clear sky, with sunlight spilling across the towers and streets of the imperial capital. The alien princess stood on her balcony, looking down at the bustling citizens below. Her heart felt lighter than it ever had before. She had faced rejection, ridicule, and isolation for years, but now she felt a sense of purpose that no one could take from her. Beside her, the human stood quietly, his presence steady and comforting. Together, they had faced the empire's scrutiny and had begun to change it. Word of their actions had spread beyond the palace walls. Citizens whispered of the princess's courage and the humans' unwavering support. Some nobles were still skeptical, but even the most resistant could not deny the strength of the bond that had been formed. The alliance was no longer a threat. It had become a symbol of progress, of values that transcended tradition, appearances, and fear. The princess turned to the human, her eyes reflecting both pride and curiosity. "Do you think the Empire will ever fully accept us?" she asked softly. He shook his head gently, a small smile on his lips. "Acceptance takes time, but that is not what matters most. What matters is that we stand for what is right, and that we show others that courage, loyalty, and intelligence are worth more than superficial perfection." Their daily work continued. Together, they traveled to provinces that had long been neglected, listening to the people, learning their struggles, and implementing practical solutions. The human's perspective, combined with the princess's knowledge and insight, allowed them to resolve disputes and improve conditions in ways the empire had never imagined. Farmers received fair trade agreements, engineers were given resources to repair critical infrastructure, and children were allowed to attend schools that taught both knowledge and ethics. The citizens began to see the princess not as a figure of pity, but as a leader who understood their lives and cared for their well-being. They saw the human as more than a visitor. He became a partner who brought knowledge, courage, and moral clarity. Slowly, the empire itself began to change, not through force, but through the quiet example of two individuals who refused to be limited by fear or expectation. Yet not all challenges had been overcome. Some nobles continued to resist, plotting in secret to undermine the princess and the human. They whispered of scandal, suggesting that the bond between a princess and a human was unnatural and dangerous. Rumors spread, trying to sow doubt among citizens and allies alike. One evening, the princess received an urgent message. A neighboring system had declared its dissatisfaction with the empire's leadership. They were threatening sanctions, and if ignored, could escalate to open conflict. The Council of Elders looked to the princess for guidance, expecting her to falter under pressure. The human stood by her side as she reviewed the situation. "We have faced worse," he said quietly. "The question is not whether they will respect us, but whether we will act with wisdom and courage." The princess nodded. Together, they devised a strategy that combined diplomacy, intelligence, and practical solutions. They reached out to the neighboring system, acknowledging their concerns while demonstrating the empire's commitment to fairness and justice. Letters were written, envoys dispatched, and agreements proposed. The human's calm reasoning and the princess's keen understanding of political dynamics allowed them to negotiate a solution that satisfied both sides. When the neighboring system agreed to the terms, the court erupted in disbelief. The alliance had prevented a crisis that could have escalated into war. The princess and the human had demonstrated that strength was not only in power or appearances, but in wisdom, moral courage, and the ability to act decisively for the good of all. The emperor, who had observed their actions from a distance, finally called the princess to his private chambers. He looked at her with a mixture of pride and astonishment. "You have done what no one expected," he said quietly. "You have shown the empire that strength is more than perfection. You have changed our traditions, perhaps forever." The princess bowed respectfully, a small smile on her lips. "I could not have done it alone," she replied. "The human has shown me that courage and integrity are the true measures of strength. Together, we have accomplished what the empire could not, and I hope this is only the beginning." The emperor regarded her for a long moment, then nodded. "You have my support," he said. "And the empire will follow in time. You have earned your place, not because of birth or status, but because of who you are." The princess felt a surge of relief and pride. She had spent her life being judged, overlooked, and dismissed. Now she was recognized for her intelligence, her courage, and her character. She knew that her bond with the human had been instrumental in this transformation, not because of his strength, but because of his respect, understanding, and unwavering support. In the following weeks, the empire continued to adjust. Citizens who had long suffered neglect saw new opportunities. Reforms were implemented, infrastructure repaired, and education expanded. The princess and the human worked tirelessly, side by side, earning the respect of those who had once doubted them. Their example inspired others to look beyond appearances, to value courage and integrity over superficial measures of worth. One afternoon, as the sun set over the capital, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, the princess and the human walked through the palace gardens. Flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the air was filled with the soft hum of distant activity. The princess looked at the human, her eyes reflecting gratitude and admiration. "Do you ever regret coming here?" she asked. He shook his head, smiling. "Never. I have learned more about courage, honor, and strength than I could have imagined. And I have found someone whose spirit cannot be measured by tradition or expectation." The princess felt a warmth in her chest. She had spent years believing she was alone, unwanted, and incapable. But now she understood that her worth had never been limited by her body or by society. It had always been defined by her courage, her intelligence, and her heart. As night fell, the stars twinkled above the palace, and the city lights reflected like mirrors across the streets. The princess stood on a balcony, looking out over the empire she had helped transform. She thought of the challenges still to come, the resistance that remained, and the work that would never truly end. Yet she felt ready. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and isolation, and she had emerged stronger. With the human by her side, she knew she could face anything. The human joined her, standing quietly. "You have changed the empire," he said softly. "Not through force, but through courage, wisdom, and integrity. That is the greatest victory of all." The princess smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. "And you have changed me," she replied. "You have shown me that strength is not in perfection, but in respect, understanding, and the courage to stand for what is right." Together, they watched the stars, knowing that their partnership was more than a bond of convenience or duty. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when individuals acted with integrity, courage, and respect for one another. The empire had been challenged, traditions questioned, and prejudices confronted. And though there was still work to be done, the future had never looked brighter. In the following months, the princess's influence continued to grow. She implemented educational programs that valued critical thinking, ethics, and creativity. Engineers and scientists were given the resources to innovate, and the citizens began to see the tangible benefits of a leadership based on understanding and cooperation. The human continued to provide guidance and insight, helping to navigate the complex political landscape with tact and wisdom. Even the most skeptical nobles began to acknowledge the effectiveness of their leadership. They could no longer dismiss the princess as weak or flawed. Her intelligence, combined with the human's calm reasoning and moral clarity, had transformed the empire in ways that few could have imagined. One day, the princess stood before a council of leaders from across the empire. She spoke with confidence, addressing issues that had long been ignored and proposing solutions grounded in fairness, wisdom, and compassion. The council listened, some with reluctance, others with admiration, but all were compelled to acknowledge the power of her vision. After the meeting, the human joined her quietly. "You have done more than I imagined," he said. "The empire is changing, and it is because of your courage and intellect. Together, we have proven that strength comes in many forms." The princess looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "And it is because of your respect and partnership that I can lead with confidence. We have shown the empire that courage and integrity matter more than appearances or tradition." As the days turned into weeks, the princess and the human continued their work, side by side. Their bond, once questioned and ridiculed, had become a symbol of hope and progress. Citizens admired their dedication, and the empire began to evolve in ways that reflected the values of courage, respect, and wisdom. The princess had been rejected by many, judged for her body, and underestimated her entire life. But she had found someone who saw her true value, who respected her choices, and who stood by her side without hesitation. Together, they had faced challenges, changed the empire, and demonstrated that the greatest strength comes not from power or perfection, but from integrity, courage, and the willingness to act for what is right. As the stars sparkled above the capital that night, the princess and the human stood together on the balcony, looking out over the city that had been transformed by their courage. They did not need approval or validation from the court, for they knew the truth. Strength was not in tradition, but in action, not in appearances, but in character, not in fear, but in the choice to stand for what is right. And in that quiet moment, the princess felt a sense of completion. She had been rejected, underestimated and judged her entire life, but now she had a future filled with possibility, respect, and partnership. The human beside her had shown her the meaning of true strength, and together they would continue to shape a world where courage, intelligence, and integrity were valued above all else. The Empire had learned a lesson it could never forget. True power was not in dominating others or maintaining appearances, but in recognizing and nurturing the worth of every individual. And the princess, once rejected by all, had become a symbol of that truth, standing tall and proud, with a human who had believed in her from the very beginning. Together, they had changed the course of history, proving that courage, respect, and moral strength could overcome prejudice, tradition, and fear. And as the stars twinkled above, the princess knew that her life, and the life of the Empire, would never be the same again.